Instead, we have the opportunity to make a habit of empathy, to recognize ourselves in each other.
Kumar and other notables from UC Berkeley founded Ahimsa some years ago, and we thank you so much for all that you've done in bridging science, humanities, spirituality, and helping us find new ways to act in the world. So thank you. I'm Ruth Richards, and before I start, I gave out these little smile cards, so if you got one and are saying, what is this? This is from Nipun Mehta, no relation, right? But who has a wonderful organization called Charity Focus, and we want to spread good in the world. So do something good for someone and leave this card, which says smile, you've just been tagged. And then their job is to pay it forward. And so on and so on and so on. So here are the rest of them. I'm going to keep one. And feel free to take more than one. Okay, this is a very good introduction. Age of Empathy ? What's the question? What's wrong with empathy? So before we start, I would like you to think to yourself, or write down if you want, what empathy means to you. Because we're going to have some audience participation here. I'm not going to ask you what you wrote down, but some other kinds of things about empathy. Because we all got something to say. I'm really welcoming you here to an event that's about something we all intimately know and have an intuitive sense about. But there may be some other things that we all can learn here that will help make it a better world. Let us hope. I have a little thing that's supposed to advance slides, so let's see if that happens. No? Oops. All right, didn't work. Back to the other way. There are 5 issues we're going to deal with here. And the first one is defining empathy. Boy, does that sound boring. It's not. It's complex. And it shows we're dealing with something special. Is it devalued? Is it ever? You can see if you agree with that. Oh, I did the wrong one. Thank you. Creativity. What could this have to do with creativity? Can this help us? Surprisingly, yes. Age of Empathy ? Jeremy Rifkin, advisor to the European Union, thinks so, that if we don't enter an age of empathy, we may not, as a species, survive, and some other species may go down along the way. The good news is there's hope. We're more connected than we know, and there may be some real joys as well as help in that direction. It worked. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little, I'm going to tell a story first about Hurricane Katrina, which was August 2005 and horrible. But before doing that, I want to recognize we've had a lot of natural disasters and are having them now. Whether it's the earthquake and the tsunami in Japan or all of the terrible things happening in the southern USA. So we're not overlooking those, but focusing here for a number of reasons. And this hurricane, not only Category 5, but it put 80% of New Orleans underwater. And people were fleeing, of course, others couldn't flee. And all kinds of awful things happened during Katrina. A year later, August 2006, the American Psychological Association held its annual meeting. And a group of lovely people, including Mitch Hall, who's back there waving, and I and others did a seminar on empathy, not by accident, in the same place in the Montreal Convention Center that was the second largest refuge for people who were, refugees who were survivors of Katrina. And so I want to tell you, as we did there, and that was second to the Superdome, which had its own problems, that there was a woman who later put on email the following story. And you may say, oh, how nice. This was not the fault of the convention center. They were doing their best. But as you know, there were systems failures at the city and state, and especially the national level, that really left people in danger. Okay, so here was this woman. And she had been in a house that collapsed. She put this on email. And she finally found one of these buses that bused her to the convention center, where she finally thought she and others would be safe. And so there they were, and no food, no water, nothing arrived. Trucks went by, soldiers went thumbs up, and no food, no water. And this was day after day. And people died from exposure, from not so much from lack of water, but just because they were without any kind of help. There were these guys with guns. Interestingly, they turned out to be the good guys. There were these young kids who started keeping order because someone had to help. Okay? So this woman tried to escape, and that was the word she used. She and others tried to cross, if you know New Orleans, one of these bridges that goes from the area of the convention center to another part of the city. And perhaps you recall back then they were saying, we can't let people over these bridges, they're going to loot the stores. Okay. She was sent back. Others were sent back to the convention center, no food, no water, and she truly felt that they had been sent there to die. They were alone, they were forgotten. Okay. I just wish she could have been there a year later when we were doing this seminar, because here was this room full of people, and some were just there to get continuing education credit, but others were there because they were Katrina rescue workers or interested in empathy for one of a number of reasons. And they were so moved. If she could have seen all these people witnessing the pain of those people a year before in that very same place and known how much they cared, that they were hearing her story. And that can mean so much to any of us, to have someone there with us at the worst time when we feel alone and think that no one's listening or no one wants to listen. And there was a lot of that with Katrina. And then we'll get back to this, but I wanted to start with this story. Okay, and so I'm going to turn from this story to definitions, but in a very deliberate way, because I'm going to ask you some questions. Do you think these situations, where is empathy present? Is empathy absent? Is empathy relevant? And I'll just go through a couple or a few quickly and tell me what you think. So you can just speak up if you want to do that. All right, you're at the breakfast table, you're with another person, and you really want to tell them something, and they have the paper up, and they're going, Okay, empathy, present, absent, relevant. Yep, bad news, no. Okay, what about now you're at the table? You could actually argue any of these, but let's not. But you're at the table and you say to someone, I know just how you feel, I lost my job once. Okay, empathy, present, absent.
But I think the key is really for me to listen to you rather than you behind your newspaper. And I think if you're behind your newspaper, I can't really listen to you. Mm-hmm. And I really need to know what you're thinking. Mm-hmm. And I need to know what you're feeling. Mm-hmm. More importantly, what you're feeling about losing your job.
Okay.
And then my empathy jumps out.
Okay, excellent.
And then
so how can you empathize if you don't know enough about them? Yeah.
Well, if you actually choose a moment when they're hiding behind their newspaper to try to communicate with them, shame on you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to move along. These are all great comments. If we could discuss these endlessly. So, but here's another one we could discuss endlessly. Okay, somebody is standing there and a big weight, a brick, falls on their toe. Ouch. And in your brain, in your sensory cortex, there are neurons that light up in your brain the same as in theirs as they feel this ouch. Okay, is that empathy? You've heard of mirror neurons? I'm going back the old-fashioned way here. Right. That we actually have discovered in 1992. These neurons that are mirroring other people's experience. Some think this may have a lot to do with how language is learned or how young kids learn by imitation. Whatever the case, this is amazing. Is it empathy? Some would say, yeah, others would say, well, it all depends how you interpret this sensation. So we could, again, discuss these. But it's really interesting that we have this neurobiological evidence. Okay. What do we get here? All right, this is Paul Ekman here. 3 perspectives on empathy. And to lead into this, let me get rid of that one for a minute. There we go. Now we have a sociopath. And this sociopath can really read you. And the reason they're doing this isn't because they care, but because they want to sell you something you don't need. Is that empathy? Okay. All right, well, here's where Paul Ekman has these who study different facial expressions and emotion, and okay. He's distinguished these 3 categories, the first being cognitive, so it's intellectual, it's perspective taking. And he would say that this sociopath can do the first one. May not care, but kind of knows what's going on. Second one, the emotional experience, as you're saying, there's more to know. And so this might involve mirror neurons and involves a different kind of experience. And the third kind of puts it together. You understand, you feel, and you are moved to act. Okay, so that's another way to break it down. This is just to get a sense that we're dealing with something pretty complex, and it's more complex than that. Okay, so here's your dog, your wonderful dog. You're having a bad day, and the dog comes and puts his head in your lap. Is that empathy? It's like they say they're the Nobel Prize winners for empathy. But someone could argue, well, it's the second kind. It's the emotional kind, but they don't really know. Yeah. Anyway, it's complex. All right, but the dogs are the best. A psychotherapist, and the client really feels this person is tuned in. Empathy.
Could you say that all these examples are examples of one kind or another of empathy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what I'm doing is just trying to create a big picture of one kind or another of empathy. So here's a psychotherapist, and they seem very tuned into a client. Okay. And what's going on here? What's interesting is there are these different schools of psychotherapy, and here's type A, and they're better than type B. But what's true of all of them is the relationship is key. Okay. That is what's so special. And I was hoping Art Bohart would be here tonight. I thought he would be. If you got your handout here, there's some references on the back, and Art Bohart's edited book on empathy is there. He's a wonderful psychotherapist, and I was going to point to him at this point. So, but he did this entire book on empathy and psychotherapy. So do look at those references. I will refer to them more than once and explain why they're there. Okay, Dalai Lama. In this case, someone asked His Holiness the Dalai Lama, what do you do when you're lonely? And the Dalai Lama said, I don't get lonely. Why not? They were amazed. And he said, because whoever I meet, I connect with them. I look at them in a positive way. I find an affinity. And then instead of having fear and apprehension, as some people do, I connect positively. Is that empathy? I'm going to call that one empathy plus, and we'll see if we can get back to empathy plus a lot later on. All right, but that's the Dalai Lama. One person I would love to credit here is Judy Jordan. Have people heard of the relational cultural theorists at the Stone Center at Wellesley and also Harvard Medical School, including Jan Surrey, Judy Jordan, Jean Baker Miller, originally Irene Stiver, and others? Because they're who really gave me, they're great. All right, look at your reading list. They're who really got me interested, and more than interested, because we were working clinically with very severely ill people and applying these wonderful principles. And they're just great people still doing that work. But anyway, as a clinician, she wrote that empathy, and just the yellow part here, always involves affective surrender. So speaking as a clinician here, and cognitive structuring. Okay, ego boundaries must be flexible. Empathy begins with, I've left out a lot of stuff, human relatedness, followed by a surrender to affective arousal in oneself, producing a temporary identification. Pardon my cough. And finally, a resolution period in which one understands what has just happened. So there's both a real kind of standing in their shoes, as the saying goes, but also a sense, I'm a therapist, I need to have perspective, I need to, help. So I think the main point here is that there are many kinds of empathy, and none of them are simple. There's a lot going on here. Some people do consider it simple. All right. So we've looked at definitions. We haven't concluded anything, but now let's look at this issue of who here thinks empathy is devalued, isn't really valued enough in our culture? Anyone else? Okay, a lot of people do. Yeah. Well, I want to really show you why I think so. And so Darwin is a good place to start, because Charles Darwin, we think of historically as the person who has really helped us understand evolution of different species and why some survive and others don't. He actually had a lot to say about empathy under a slightly different word. And who's ever heard about it? A lot of people have never. You guys coming in, there is a handout here, and it also has some readings on the back I'm referring to from time to time, which are books worth buying. All right. Sympathy. And that was the word at the time, not just his word. Empathy came a little later. Mark, did you have a comment?
What I heard was that in Darwin's major works, that the term survival of the fittest was mentioned twice.
Yes, indeed.
And the word love was mentioned 88 times.
Well, luckily we're about to get there, and it was 95. Thank you for that lead-in. And anyone know who Howard Gruber is? Because Howard Gruber was writing in 1981 about the lost Darwin. And David Loy's done a lot of work, and Mitch has some other people who were even earlier. So, okay, Mumford. But we never heard, or at least I never did. Here's what Mark was referring to. Okay. In Darwin's later work, his later book, his last book was Descent of Man, and then his private journals. He was writing a lot now about humans in the context of morality and connection and caring, totally different than natural selection. And in fact, one of the two things he said about survival of the fittest was, in the earlier editions of my Origin of the Species, I perhaps attributed too much to the action of natural selection or the survival of the fittest. So he was apologizing for it. Right. Love, 95 times. Not all about humans, some about animals. We are looking at all beings here. Moral sensitivity, big issue for humans and others. And he wrote about other creatures in that context. Right. Sympathy was his closest word. He used it 61 times. We'll look at this a little more shortly. And by the way, selfishness, any guesses how many times he mentioned selfishness? 0. No, it's a little more than 0. 9 times, okay. But he was really somewhere else with this work. Okay. And for example, he said, and by the way, did you know that Darwin once trained for the ministry? When I was writing, or actually I was editing a chapter in a book that is in the other room called Everyday Creativity and New Views of Human Nature, and some of what I'm talking about here you can learn more about in that book. including a chapter by David Loy on the lost Darwin. Excuse me, sorry for the cough here. But Darwin, when I was doing that work and editing his chapter, I read a book on Darwin, and I had no idea he had trained for the ministry. So he ended up, I think, not as eager to do that work, but he still cared deeply about ethics and values and humans loving each other, et cetera. So that he said, may not moral sense arise from our enlarged capacity for strong, instinctive sexual, parental, and social instincts, giving rise to, and he mentioned things like do unto others as you would want them to do unto you, love thy neighbor. And I'll come to Jeremy Rifkin later, but he points out how love thy neighbor is found in just about every sacred text, in Leviticus, first in the Bible, and so on, and in the Jains and Hindus and Buddhists, some equivalent of love thy neighbor. Garrett's frowning. All right, okay. We got a lawyer frowning at me, I'm worried. All right, okay. All right, so that's a baby elephant on the left there between the big ones, if you can't quite see, it's so sweet, and the mother and child. But Darwin also said, we have seen how the social instincts that prime principle of our moral constitution lead over our evolution to the golden rule. As ye would that others should do unto you, do ye to them likewise. Is this survival of the fittest as people commonly think of it? Okay. We'll get to social Darwinism in a minute, which is one thing that happened. But what's so important right now is that the second half of what Darwin wrote about is totally different when he was writing about human nature and our higher possibilities. He wasn't saying we have some less savory ones. Okay. But he really was anticipating, in many ways, humanistic and positive psychology, looking at some of the better things that human beings could achieve. All right. Okay. So I just want to ask you what your quick take is on human nature, anything. And it doesn't have to be an encompassing statement, but it could be lock your car. Right?
I think we're hardwired to do good. And the reason for that is because animals intrinsically know the extent of play because they have to develop play behavior that actually allows them to protect themselves ultimately. Mm-hmm. And if they do not know the extent of where not play exists, they couldn't exist.
Uh-huh.
So I think we are all hardwired to know good.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. Any other statements on human nature? Positive or negative? Lock your car, don't take any wooden nickels. Carry your purse close. Mitch?
I think I find value in the oration on human dignity by the Renaissance humanist Pico della Mirandola. But I don't think of it in theistic terms. I think our primary nature, when we're raised in an environment of an evolutionary adaptedness, as John Bowlby called it, is for creative altruism and love and connection and so on. However, if we're raised in a harsh environment, which may be due to natural catastrophes where we don't get the love and nurturance and don't have the social institutions and the economic structure to support it, then we can devolve, and the human brain is not developed fully, and different networks become predominant and so on. And I'll stop now because it's long, but I think...
Yeah, you just about finished my talk
for me. As Pico della Mirandola said, we can rise higher than the angels or lower than the demons. And I think we have evidence for all of that. So our nature is very plastic, and it really is a collaborative, creative effort to bring out the best in all of us.
Okay, great. Remember the word epigenetics. We'll get to that. You like that. Okay. So Ahimsa in 2005 had a one-day conference. We have these short things, and then we have all-day conferences on special topics. So that year we did one on empathy. And this gentleman named Arthur Gladstone, who's not here, I assume, but it'd be great if he were, came up to me after and he handed me something he'd written, which was so good I ended up publishing it in one of the references on this sheet. But I'm going to read you part of what he said. And this was on our human nature. Our present way of life. Oh, and he had worked at Chestnut Lodge, which is a mental health facility, really good one in Massachusetts. Our present way of life encourages us to be self-centered. Our present way of life, as Mitch says, and self-protective. As children in school and as adults at work, we are urged to look out for ourselves, to compete rather than to cooperate. Success means getting ahead of others, right, and leaving them behind. So it's a zero-sum game. In order to go beyond superficial reform efforts, we need to understand deeply our interdependence with all of life. Okay. So let's see, I'll go forward one here. I want you to do something else here without thinking. Quickly take a finger and write the capital letter E on your forehead. And it needs to be a capital letter. Okay, and do it one more time so I can look. Okay, well, you know what you did, and what's so interesting about this is a study was done where there were two groups, and the people in this group were made to feel more powerful by writing about something that happened where they felt really powerful, and the other group wrote about something that made them feel less powerful. And there was a big difference, in fact, 3-to-1, in how the powerful group did the E on their forehead. Any guesses?
Perhaps the powerful group did the E so other people could read it in the right direction.
Oh, the powerful people did it so other people could read it in the right direction. Any other thoughts?
Well, if you do the E one way, it's for you to look at it. If I do it the other way, it's for me.
Yeah.
I did it in both ways.
You did it both ways? All right, well, Ingrid did it both ways. All right. Donna, how did you do it? Oh, I won't ask you.
I did it like that.
Oh, so I could read it. Okay. Because, no, I had a friend who got very upset about this because she did it the other way. She said, well.
I've already read this literature, so I know how to do it.
Oh, okay. And since I read about it before I did it, I'll never know what I would have done. All right, but the study said, we could debate the study, okay, that those who felt more powerful made the E so they could read it. Okay. And the ones who were not so powerful, were they more tuned in to other people? Did it so the others could read it. Okay. Interesting, huh? Okay. But part of what's interesting about this is how malleable we are, as Mitch was saying, because there was an intervention, and the intervention caused one group to do this 3 times more than the other. So we have more than one trick in our bags, and some are better than others.
Which group did it 3 times more than the other?
The backwards one, the one that would be backwards to you looking at them.
Less powerful did it more often.
The people who felt more powerful did it so you couldn't read it. Right?
More often?
3 times as often. They did it so it would be backwards to you looking at them. Yeah. Okay, interesting, huh? Okay. Oh, and let me credit who did this study, Adam Galinsky and Associates.
The people who felt more powerful wrote the E so that they would be able to read.
Like this.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Yeah.
I just want to get the direction.
Uh-huh. I had to try really hard not to do it to show you how to do it.
So I'd be really curious about more about the process that all those people went through. Like, how many of those people in either group actually thought through, well, should I do this so that I can read it, or should I do it so the others can read it? I certainly went through that process. It's like, which way should I do it? Because it was really clear that I had that choice. Did they think about the choice?
I don't know. did you think about it? And what's interesting is that with this intervention, it was still 3 to 1. And I told you to do it right away.
And were these
But I don't know what you
co-ed?
did.
My question is, what's the definition of powerful?
That's a good question.
And that's a whole other discussion. But so this is not power with, this is power over, right? Power over. We're going to get someone to do what we want, our way. Okay, I'm going to turn to social Darwinism here. Okay. Because social Darwinism had nothing to do with Charles Darwin. It was Herbert Spencer and others who took the term, in fact, survival of the fittest, and interpreted it a different way. Darwin was on the Galapagos Islands saying why these turtles evolved and these could get along. But he was not doing things like the following. This is actually from a book, also in the references, by Frans de Waal. Is it de Waal or de Waal? De Waal, okay, who's Dutch. And here's one definition. So do we know people who think like this? All right. Life, social Darwinism involves life as a struggle. Those who make it shouldn't let themselves be dragged down by those who don't. Okay, we're not talking about this species and that species now. We're talking about you guys, and if you can't make it, tough. Well, that's classic survival of the social Darwinist fittest, but Charles Darwin never said anything about it.
I think it's actually survival of the luckiest. You know, were you up the valley the day the flood came down and took out the village? You know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of issues of what's the fittest. Here's another one. Poverty. This can happen from some people who think this way. Poverty is dismissed as proof of laziness, right? And social justice as weakness.
What was that?
Social justice is weakness. Why do we want to help these people, you know?
I couldn't hear you.
Just
Yeah.
think about Americans.
Yeah.
What about the rest of the world?
Mm-hmm.
They really feel different.
Well, this all happened in Europe, right? First of
Well,
all.
I think
But America jumped right on the bandwagon.
Well, I think the social context of this time, there was a rationalization for the exploitation of workers and what have you, and a poor distribution of income. They were even saying that it was God's will that there be certain people poor, and pulling out every stopper in the world to justify a monopolization of power and the exploitation of workers. And remember, this is all right after the big revolutions in 1848, in the next 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And these were just spokespersons for robbers.
Well, that's what David Loy says in his book, it's not The Lost Darwin, maybe it is The Lost Darwin. Darwin's Lost Theory, thank you. Which, no, he feels that it was used for everything from colonialism to robber barons to nuclear overkill to ethnic cleansing to genocide. And, you know, so this is part of our heritage. It's part of what we have heard a lot about. We need to deal with it explicitly and see if it's influencing us today. Or is this really something we say, you know, doesn't fit? All right. Is it influencing us today? This is about conformity here. Do we do awful things because, you know, we're pitted viciously against other people who are less fit? All right. Okay. So how many people here have heard of the Stanford Prison Experiment from the 70s? Okay, well, you're going to have to hear about it again. All right. That Phil Zimbardo and his associates at Stanford had, you know, undergraduates who were taking psychology sign up for different studies, and one thing they could sign up for was a simulation of a prison, and half were made guards and half were made prisoners. It was all guys, by the way. And what happened? What happened for this 2-week experiment was things got out of control really fast, within days. The prisoners were brutal. I'm sorry, the guards were brutal. Some of the prisoners tried. They tried to revolt. The guards were brutal, the prisoners were terrified, and it got worse and worse. And it wasn't even the experimenters, it was someone who came in from outside who said, wait, something's wrong here. They ended it in 6 days. Some of the people went for psychotherapy. And this is one reason at places like Saybrook University, we have an institutional review board. This and studies like the Milgram experiment at Yale about shocking people, that people can do awful things. And it's not like these were horrible undergraduates. They were just some undergraduates who got into an unfamiliar situation and began conforming and doing what they had seen on TV, or think about what we see on TV. And it was terrible. So there is a real lesson for all of us there, that we are all capable of this. Mitch?
Well, not 100% went to the bitter end.
Okay.
60-some% at the worst. And I don't know that the research has been done to find out what made those who said, no, I can't go on, say no, because that's really important.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Some wouldn't conform.
So we're going to move on, and maybe we'll find one thing. But if we'd say this could never happen now, it just did. Abu Ghraib. Okay, so you say, oh, creativity is going to solve this, right? Being, doing a painting. Well, when we talk about creativity, say at Saybrook University, it's about nothing wrong with doing paintings or Picasso's sunflowers or any number of wonderful works of art. I just turned it off. Hello. I'm asking Mitch for help here. All right, I turned it off. Start, there we go. All right. There we go. That we're talking about a way of life, about being original, doing things in new ways. And one thing that means, first of all, is being consciously aware. So the first difference is we're talking about people who are relatively more mindful. They're more aware. They are more kind of richly connected with possibilities. They may take particular pleasure in finding new ways to think about things and do them. And in some cases to challenge the status quo, because any creativity challenges some status quo, whether it's what we do or what somebody else does. And in looking at everyday creativity, we often look at process more than product, because you can apply it to anything. Raising your child, writing a report, teaching a class, landscaping your home, making dinner. Whatever it is, it's not so much what you do as how you do it. And with colleagues at Harvard, we've done a lot of studies on everyday creativity. And one example of someone who was very original was an auto mechanic who created his own tools so he could do the work in a particular way. Well, we've all known some uncreative auto mechanics, but this, this guy was good. Okay, so again, I want to credit the Relational School at the Stone Center and also at Harvard. Let me first read to you. We can look at this originality and meaningfulness, which is about creative product. But if we look at creative process, at best it's a joy. At best it's a joy. And so, for example, seeing, knowing, discovering, often with the joy of a child. Here she's knocking over a lamp. It's a book on meditation, actually. Understanding in new and different ways, being fresh, open, flexible, richly aware, beyond biases and preconceptions, okay, relatively speaking, delving deeply, intuiting, guessing, playing, and this is important, going bravely without knowing where you're going to end up. And that takes some courage, right? But it's a process, and it can even be a way of life. And it's very much a way of life, and was found to be one for Abraham Maslow's self-actualizing persons, who showed a lot of this kind of way of life, okay? And could be very spontaneous and humorous and fun and so on. So this is creativity. Does it apply to relationships? Or why hasn't it been applied more to relationships? And again, I want to credit the Relational School and Jan Surrey and Stephen Bergman, who have done couples work for years with the relational model, and they really helped me about 20 years ago see this as a part of creativity, that this deep connection you can have really comes from being original, aware, alert, responding in a flexible way to someone else you're really listening to, and that you are able to see things in new ways. And in the best instance, to also be open to change, right? If we're really having, you were saying, a conversation, then each person should be learning from the other and might even come to some moments of transformation where things could really change. So this is potentially a very creative process. It's original and it's certainly meaningful. Here's something that Judy Jordan wrote about empathy and mutuality, which is defined as mutual empathy. So see if you think this is a good marriage. When empathy and concern flow both ways, there is an intense affirmation of the self, and paradoxically, a transcendence of the self. A sense of the self as part of a larger relational unit. The interaction allows for a relaxation of the sense of separateness. The other's well-being becomes as important as one's own. That could be a good marriage. Okay. Could it be a good something else? A good group, a good university, a good country, or a good world, all right? Now remember the scary and the kind of mindless conformists in the Stanford Prison Experiment. And there are probably a lot of factors that are relevant to who stands up, including a firm attachment in childhood and a good relationship to caregivers, and all that's very important. But all that being equal, I would go for the highly creative person. Because here's somebody who is by nature and by choice joyfully aware of options, who is challenging the status quo, who is mindful, who is courageous to be able to take a stand that's different, who's field independent, which means not so readily influenced by everything else going on around. And I think this is really important because creativity is another area I think is greatly devalued. Oh, creativity, something for a rainy Sunday afternoon. Not a way to live that might be vastly more healthy and powerful for all of us. So what can stop our creativity? So many things, right? Inner fears, outer pressures, but here's a big one. Really big one that doesn't always get highlighted enough. Creative people tend to be highly creative, whether you're talking about famous people or just regular folks, much broader in how they're able to kind of be in the world. So that they are more, one study showed, more apt to cry, to get teared up at something, more able to feel deeply, to be sensitive, intuitive, et cetera. Okay? At the same time, more able, here's the courageous part, to be dominant, assertive, independent, determined, to take a stand. And so, what's wrong with this, and why don't we all have this, or do we? Do we? As Maslow said about his self-actualizing people, they have a lot of this. They can have it all. Do we? Okay, one problem here, and it's not all the problems, is that these qualities tend to be polarized, right? Some people have these, some people have those, and they are very often gender polarized. Now, this is not about gender. This is not about women's rights or men's rights. This is about human rights. It's about why can't we all be all the ways that we humanly are, and not be told that it's wrong to be this way if you're one kind of person, and wrong to be that way if you're another. Okay, so John Wayne wasn't very sensitive and intuitive. In the movies, I don't know about his personal life. Actually,
I saw a quote from John Wayne that said that he really resented the narrow role and that it was very much a disservice to men.
Oh, good, thank you.
So he actually was deeper than that.
Thank you. John Lane thought things were deeper than that with him. Thank you. Clint Eastwood's an interesting person. Very interesting. I just saw, I think it's called The Unforgiven. And he was doing some murdering of not very nice people. And he was so upset about having to do that. Okay, that doesn't mean we should go murder people we don't like. But it was a very complex movie. Very complex. Okay, but are we tough? So here's the next slide, hopefully.
Are we tough?
Yeah, are we tough? Is it a problem to be tough? You know who that is? Yes, it's Iron Man 2. Right. All right. And, you know, there's nothing, I mean, actually, I kind of enjoyed that movie. But there's nothing wrong with being tough if we have some other options, too. That's the point here. Okay. But, do we? Okay. Big boys don't cry. How many people grew up with that? Or know that little boys held by their mothers are already held not quite as close as the little girls? But big boys don't cry. Why not? All right. And in fact, it's healthy to cry. You know,
The song actually was Big Girls Don't Cry.
there is a song, Big Girls Don't Cry. But big boys aren't supposed to ever cry. But you're right, I could sing that. Okay. Okay, but what can big boys do? They can hit. All right? It's okay. Stand up for yourself. Be a man. Don't let them push you around. I mean, how many guys have heard that? So guess what that's correlated with? Mitch knows, right? Domestic violence, all kinds of bad things. And more women get beat up on the Super Bowl day than any other day. Another little, yeah, that's what I've heard. I couldn't tell you the citation on that. But again, it's not like being tough isn't okay. It's saying, here's someone who doesn't have other outlets. What's going to happen? That's the problem.
It goes back to a long way back on our tree, where we were warriors and hunters. You know, and we survived because we, from Mars, men, were the killers. And the ladies took care of the kids and the offspring, so we have the next generation.
Well, you know, that's very interesting because there's, you know, something to that history. That can be given, though, in a gender polarized way, as saying only the men are tough, only the women are sensitive, and the women handled the kids and so on. But you look at other cultures and you can find some very different kinds of things. And by the way, there are plenty of tough women. So, for example, in let's say in ancient China, you know, poetry, there's just incredible poetry. And it was considered, whereas here, you know, many men might not want to even read poetry, never mind be attuned to the finest nuances of expression. It was considered the highest form of cultivation to be able to truly savor and relate to this poetry. So it's a lot of this is culturally constructed, and that's an important point. We can say how much is what. But if you look at this book on here, Everyday Creativity and New Views of Human Nature, Lu Sundararajan, she's Chinese, and James Averill discuss Eastern views of creativity, because that's relevant here too, and some of the different ways it comes across. I'm going to keep going here, or else won't get through everything. So, but let me just say for the little girls, okay, the little girls, they can be sensitive, they can be, you know, feel deeply, but then it's devalued. That's changed a little these days. I look at my daughter and I think, boy, she has no idea. Because I was the only woman to graduate in physics my year at Stanford with honors. And no one thought that was good. It seemed like they just thought it was weird. What's she doing in physics? You know, right? So going against the gender stereotypes can be very difficult. Okay, but the point here isn't to deal with gender stereotypes. It's why can't we deal? So we don't want to marginalize this. Unfortunately, it gets marginalized too. We want to say that we all need to be our fullest selves and find out what's getting in the way of that. And why are we here? We're talking about empathy. What is empathy? Maybe we'll come to the next part. It's going to save us all. So is this some little, soft, delicate thing that only a few people can do, or is it something that we vitally need that we've overlooked for terrible reasons? Right? And that's a question. That's why we have a question mark. Right.
Ruth,
No.
I just, an example from political conversations is the political realist versus the bleeding hearts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you want to say more about that?
Well, I just thought it was a good
Right. The bleeding heart, yes, that doesn't count. Can't they lay off? Thank you. Okay, so it's important to remember we're not talking here about optional qualities, sensitivity, empathy, whatever you want. These are basic survival characteristics. They have been with us for eons. They've not just been with humans, they've been with the animal kingdom. They've been there across different cultures. This is really important stuff. All right. So, can we change? So say 5 times epigenetics, right? That luckily we're finding more and more. We're not just a product of our genomes as they manifest a certain way, maybe our eye color, but it really depends on our environment. There's a certain flower that blooms white in one environment and pink in another one, but so can we. And we can be more peace-loving or we can be more violent, more many things. We can be devils or angels, as you were saying. We cannot take part in the Stanford Prison Experiment. Right. So one study on this, and this is one from Duvall and Johannowitz, was where the rhesus monkeys and the stumptails were brought together as infants. So one is a more peace-loving one, the stumptails, and they are more apt to reconcile. And the rhesus is more apt to bully and so on. But when these two were raised together from infancy, for whatever reason, they took on the peaceful way and were more apt to reconcile. And then when the rhesus monkeys were taken and put with other rhesus monkeys, no more stumptails, they kept doing it, but in their own way. Okay. And so there are other studies that are more relevant to humans. We hope it isn't just for the monkeys. But there is a lot of variability possible.
Isn't that kind of akin to all the research that's going on right now about adaptive behavior that occurs when you get people that have unstable social behaviors pairing up with stable social behavior types who, they within a period of 4 years can completely readapt to being stable as opposed to unstable, whether they're avoidant or anxious.
Yes, you can definitely have someone be a good influence and change things. And those of us who've had young kids or teenagers may have seen some bad influences have at least a temporary effect. So how do we turn up the volume on empathy and down the volume on brutality or thoughtlessness and so on? And Riane Eisler, who has written a lot about cultural evolution, also she recommends 3 C's: consciousness, you got to be aware; caring, vital to how we get along with each other, never mind our brain development; and creativity, to be able to function in new and more useful ways. Okay. Oops. All right. Jeremy Rifkin, who has seen his big book, right, which is in the other room. So you can go and look at his book on empathy and how, let's see if I wrote down, who remembers the name of his book? The Empathic Civilization, Race to Global Consciousness in a World in Crisis. Okay. Is a very interesting book, even if you don't agree with every last thing that's in it. He suggests, and I like this one, we measure evolution in part by the extension of empathy. More is better. That the new brain sciences, as with the mirror neurons, are making clear that empathy is something that's built in and vital. Right? And in this complex world, more and more critical, that it may not only change our society, it can change our consciousness. And Ken Wilber, you know, the philosopher Ken Wilber also talks about this in terms of going beyond the egocentric and the group-centric, we're Americans, we're whatever, and you're not important, to the world-centric. We can't afford to do anything else. Okay? And early, and we didn't need to go much further. And then came the agricultural hydraulic revolution. People were writing things. They were living on the barren's lands. There was a little further extension of influence. The first industrial revolution in print, engines, commerce, etc. The second, electronic. Now he's suggesting we are in a third that has to do with the unprecedented global connectivity from the internet and other sources of communication. But we have a little problem. The energy is running out, the fossil fuels, the coal. We're having to go elsewhere. People are fighting each other for energy. If, instead, we can find a way to have renewable energy sources, water, air, sunlight, and to have this in our backyard, then we can have a different kind of world. And he talks about extending empathetic sensibility to the biosphere itself and all of life on Earth. A sustainable post-carbon economy that is both globally connected and locally managed. Okay. He suggests the kids are ahead of us. We can only hope. Right. Okay. Because the kids, and we'll go a little faster through the rest of it here, that the kids are connected a lot more than we are. And they're often telling us how to get on Facebook or whatever. My daughter, with a number of people around the world, literally a few years ago, sent a birthday card to a Romanian rock singer who was quite amazing. And they all thought so. And they composed an international card where each of them put some piece together, and then they sent it to the guy whose name is Arseni. And I thought that was quite astonishing. But to her, that's just something you do these days. So we could have much more diverse and expansive social networks. But in order to do that, we've got a lot of problems to solve. Or as Franz de Waal said, you know, here's the challenge of our time. Globalization by a tribal species. That's us. How do we think bigger? How do we connect around the world? He believes nothing less than a leap to global empathetic consciousness, and in less than a generation, given all the challenges we face, is what we need to resurrect the global economy and revitalize the biosphere. Okay, I'm going to go. We're more connected than we know is the most important part of this, so we'll see what we can do in, 4 minutes here. There's so many ways we're connected, even while we're saying, I'll do it myself, right? Now, let's just look for a second more at our conditioning, because how many of us were brought up to say, I'll do it, I can do it all by myself, right? We will manage on our own. We will be independent. That is part of the kind of way of thinking many of us grew up with. And if you look at Erik Erikson's levels of development, you go through all kinds of things, including autonomy, initiative, and industry, before you get to intimacy. Got to really work on your own first. Whereas we know those orphans in Romania who weren't held when they were little and didn't feel connected or understood died. So you can't wait for some later time, okay? But our conditioning notwithstanding, we, sometimes through the arts or other ways, but let's take the arts, and I'll honor Celine Vega here, who's a dancer, since she happens to be here. Here's Yeats. How many people have had this experience, where subject and object kind of are bridged, where something magical happens? Oh, body swayed to music. Oh, brightening glance. How can we know the dancer from the dance? in art. Right? There's one series of bamboo paintings by a 14th century Chinese artist named Wu Qian, which is called Portrait of the Artist as Bamboo. That's the series. Or from this book on Chinese brush painting, paint with love and kindness for the materials and the subject portrayed, becoming one with both. And this does not take being enlightened. It's part of our human equipment. And science is showing Bell's phenomenon, two electrons that were once linked, even light years apart, one changes, the other changes. There are connections we have no clue. And they're everywhere. The second point here is about how we perceive. And if you've done a lot of spiritual practice, this may click more readily. I can't explain it in the short time. We have the eye. We have what's seen. We have the perception process. Okay. We have this. No one's seeing this the same way. All of this is a process that comes up together. Okay. That this has already been named when you see it, whatever it's called. That it's been boxed and packaged by our past, by our preconceptions, by our biases. That we are seeing the world through the past. And we're all seeing it differently, too. And that also applies to us, right? So when we say, let's be in the present moment, this is really important. This is not easy. This is really fresh in a whole new way. And some of this art can sometimes bring us that, moving along. Okay, so Einstein had no problem with that. A human being is part of the whole, a part limited in time and space. Experiences his thoughts and feelings as something separate from the rest, a kind of prison for us. Can we get out of prison? Okay, here was this one, a Zen master I know told me this story about an ancient Vietnamese king who asked a venerable monk, "How do I rule well?" And the monk said, "If you take the pain of others as your own, you will become a good king." And he went on, "You don't need to look for the Buddha." Now we are talking about something more. Okay. But what do? Okay, life is hard and we get burned out. And even with the finest spiritual practice, can we keep going forever? A friend was saying there's empathy overload. You're on the internet and there are all these horrible things happening. How can we deal with this? And let me just, going back to Katrina, because these are shots from that terrible time. And here's this rescuer rescuing the little boy, and maybe he's going to go on to rescue 50 other kids. Long day. How do you keep going? Joanna Macy has dealt with groups who are socially active in very difficult situations, and she will have them work in groups to talk about the pain and the challenge and how hard it is. And then to delve deeply into their spiritual practice, to find sources of renewal. Again, not to say it's easy, not to say it can always be done, and people need to take breaks. But it's so important to have that empathy. It's not always simple, it's not always easy, but it's always important. So one way to look at it is in terms of what's called in Buddhism, but every other wisdom tradition has something comparable, the four immeasurables. Called this because, or Thich Nhat Hanh calls them the four aspects of true love. If you practice them, they will grow in you every day until they embrace the world. Okay. Loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. Very much intertwined, and these are just words for something that's really one big piece here, where loving kindness, if you truly understand and connect with someone, then you can truly love them. I think you were saying that. And truly have compassion if they're hurting. And truly be joyful if something good happens. And equanimity, some people think is about indifference, or, we won't care too much. It's about just the opposite, that the love we have For those who are close to us now, we can expand and expand and expand until it encompasses the world. Joanna Macy, Thich Nhat Hanh said, there's no phenomenon in the universe that does not intimately concern us. If we looked at the perception, I mean, it all comes up together. We are connected to everything, from a pebble resting at the bottom of the ocean to the movement of a galaxy millions of light years away. Or as Walt Whitman said, I believe a leaf of grass is not less than the journey work of the stars. Okay. So, where have we come? Definition. Empathy is very complicated. And it may involve something even more special, right, than what these definitions seem to imply. Devalued big time. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but let's keep our lens on what those reasons are so they don't stop us now. Creativity is a way of life. We want people who are aware and active and can challenge the status quo. Do we need an age of empathy? Definitely. And is there a way we may be able to find this more easily and joyfully? Yes. Whether you want to call that spirituality or something else. There are some higher truths that are very nice. So I want to finish by reading to you. I'm going to turn this off before it beeps. Just a paragraph from David Brooks. You know David Brooks? PBS commentator and author and columnist. And did you finish next to the last page of the book? Okay. Because the book is based on the premise of following this fictional couple, Harold and Erica. I hope that's right. As they go through life and are reacting to all of these genetic and environmental forces, and it's very well documented, well researched. I was delighted that he really let us leave the page at the end. And here's what he said, and Harold is dying. This couple we followed from the beginning of their relationship. And so he said, for a few moments, consciousness seemed about to flicker back. He could sense Erica weeping out there, and compassion enveloped him. Inside, the swirls in his mind were still interlooping with hers. They were shared swirls that leaped across from her conscious world to his unconscious one. Categories fell away. Tenderness was out of control. His ability to focus attention ended, and at the same time, his ability to interpenetrate the souls of others increased. His relation to her at this moment was direct. There were no analytics, no reservations, no ambitions, no future desires or past difficulties. It was just I and thou, a unity of being, a higher state of knowledge, a merger of souls. At this point, his questions about the meaning of life were no longer asked, but were answered. And my question is, can we find this connection and share it with all beings? Thank you.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. I'm sure it has raised many questions in your mind, but we don't have time for the question and answer. If you have any special ones during the tea break, you can ask her.
Okay. And now we have Abby.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because we're going to have the tea break from 9 to 9:30.
Yeah, but we have two short items to take care of.
Mm-hmm.
So if you allow me, Abby is going to lead a beautiful meditative practice. As you have seen, that the age of reason is over. So, how to get in touch how to get in touch with the connectivity. So that's where the heart comes in. So it was David.
So, if you could all, just for a moment, feel right where you're sitting right now. And be really comfortable. So, one of the great things about where you are right now is you're not having to hold yourself up. You're sitting in a chair, and the chair is actually supporting your weight. So, you might just enjoy that for a moment. And perhaps also enjoy wherever your feet are, the contact of your feet with the ground. And no matter where you are, you can always do that. You can always feel your rear end sitting, if you happen to be sitting, and your feet in contact with the ground. So that may be an aid to coming into just one's body. For me, that's very important in terms of starting to cultivate relation to oneself and to compassion. So just really enjoying. You're not doing anything special. You're not trying to be, really posture perfect or anything right now. You're just enjoying sitting. And then maybe just taking a moment and starting to rub the back of one hand with the other. And you're breathing. You're not holding your breath. So you're just breathing normally. But just think about your hands and your poor hands, everything they do during the day, how much we take them for granted until they get a little arthritis or you bang them on something. You can also rub in between your fingers and on the edge of your hands. If you're holding your breath, start breathing again. And then you can move and start to rub the back of the other hand. Let your belly be relaxed. So it's just kind of activating your hands in a way. What if these were somebody else's hands and you didn't know them at all? In fact, if you look at them now, they may look a little weird if you kind of look at them newly. And now start to rub the palms together and your fingers together. And if your hands are okay and not so painful, you start to get, in fact, it's a little cold here, so you might enjoy doing this. Just start to rub them almost as if you could make a fire. Your hands are sticks and you're starting to rub them. Get them going really strong. You're still breathing, not holding your breath. A little more, a little more, a little more. Now stop. Hold your hands out at heart level. And see if you can just relax your wrists and your elbows and your shoulders. Maybe you're feeling a little tingling in your hands right now, some of you. And you might even imagine or feel that there's a globe that has settled in your hands now. Kind of like a globe of warm, pulsating, healing energy. And you might feel that, or you could just imagine that. Almost imagine the weight and the roundness of this globe. And then you might bring your hands so that they're facing each other, the palms are facing each other. And you might sense into and feel or just imagine that this globe is starting to get bigger. It's pushing your hands farther apart. So feel or just imagine that expanding, pulsating energy. You're still breathing, belly can be relaxed, and the chair is holding you up. And then that globe starts to condense, pulsating, warm, smaller, and your hands may come closer together. So just in your own way, be with this expanding of this warm ball of energy, and it's condensing. You can almost feel it as it changes in this way. There's no right way to do it. You're just playing with it. And you're still breathing, we hope. When you're ready, your hands can come back so that the palms are up at about heart level. And your arms are still really relaxed. And then very slowly, you can begin to move your hands up toward your body, toward your chest, as if that globe of warm energy is starting to flow and even melt directly into your body, even before your hands and fingers and palms come to rest on your body, on your chest, as they can right now. You might sense or just imagine that healing warmth directly penetrating into your chest, into your heart, through the cloth that you're wearing, through skin, through tissue, where your hands touch, where there's that contact. It warms and relaxes, starts to flow down through your diaphragm, down through your stomach, rounding like a golden sun, down into the belly, flowing over your legs, through your lower body, rounding over your knees, down through your calves and legs, all the way down through your heels, your arches, flowing into each of your toes. And also moving now, feeling once more your hands still at your heart, moving up through your chest, up into your throat, up through your head and your face, flowing over your scalp, relaxing down through your forehead, your eyebrows, your eyes, your jaw melts away the tension. And you're sensing also right where the back of your head and neck meet, down through your shoulders, flowing down your spine. Wherever in your body something needs attention, you can feel or imagine that that warmth, that healing energy just goes there. You don't have to do anything. It goes there as naturally as your blood flows through your body. And now if you want, if there is a place that needs some attention, that may be habitually tired or tense, you can just bring your hands there and let that warm healing energy and your contact with yourself go to that place. For some of us, that place at the heart might be that kind of base that we keep. So now you, in relationship with yourself, with this healing energy, as you breathe in more of what warms and relaxes. But you also have that contact through touch. And maybe you're imagining, as you're contacting what needs attention right now, someone you love very, very much. Someone who you just kind of see in your mind's eye, you see what they're doing right now. They may be happy or they may be having a hard time. But the feeling you have now, your contact, your relation with yourself, your wish for your own healing, your ability to touch into your own contact, you can have that wish for that person that you love. You're not doing anything special. You're just imagining, feeling that this is available for them. You can stay with that a while. And you can come back again to yourself when you need that. You don't have to have this run out. You can feel or imagine that we are connected to an infinite source of loving, healing, energy, and relationship. And you can continue on through this practice with others that you love and have this wish for, this embodied, compassionate wish. We can do much more with this meditation, but for now, maybe just feeling for yourself, marking for yourself what it's like now to sit grounded, contacting the chair, feeling that support of yourself. You can support this practice, this relation. You can mark how it feels to contact this healing energy. You can come back to this feeling anytime you want through this practice, the physical practice, but also perhaps through the power of that inner knowing. If you practice this, it may be that it becomes available on other levels. And when you're ready, you can bring your hands down. And maybe this can continue in the way that it feels good now for it to continue. So that's meditation.
See the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.